So you are hot off the plane from New Orleans. How many tails of cocktail have you done? Have you done all of them?
All of them except one. The first two, by the way, were Southern Comfort Tales of the Cocktail. That's what they were called. It was a Brown Forman event. And then after Katrina, Brown Forman chose not. Well, they had bought a building down almost to the river, beautiful old 3-story building. Tony Abuganan was going to do a bar on the second floor. They wanted to have a little museum on the third floor. It's a big building, and the whole first floor would be a restaurant. And so they totally scrapped that idea. And we had talked to them about doing the museum up there, but when we got down to brass tacks, we said, well, and they said, of course, they'll use the Brown Forman products. I said, well, yeah, sure, but I mean, it's the Museum of the American Cocktail. It's going to be every product. I said, oh. So that was the end of that idea.
Right.
And so we had to find a more, and so the museum itself, that's another conversation, but Tales of the Cocktail grew kind of out of that idea. It was my wife's idea, to tell you the honest to God truth, and we started here in New York, and the first exhibit was in Las Vegas, borrowing artifacts from a big collection out there under the name of the Museum of the American Cocktail. We had put together a little group by then. Anastasia and Jared, who you know well, they left pretty early after because they got a really great gig with the Ricard family to go to that Bandal Island and just I'm sure you've seen the site where they scanned in all those books and there's
EUCVS online.
Such an incredible,
it's amazing, and you can search by word, and all of a sudden,
my life.
I know. Because you're like, right, let's find every book that mentions vodka, for example, and by date range or whatever, and they're like, oh, right, there's that, and there's that, and then that, yeah.
So the saga of the museum is quite extraordinary. We simultaneously trying to put a museum together here in New York and one in this pharmacy museum. St. John Frizzell, who now operates Gage and Tallender Steakhouse, which had been destroyed, and he rescued it from a beauty parlor, and thank God they hadn't torn up. All the walls were still intact behind their stuff, so he could get back to the old Gage and Tallender room. But he introduced to the lady who operated the pharmacy museum. It's 3 floors on Charter Street. Mm-hmm. Extraordinary, pharmacy cocktail has always been.
There's something there, isn't there? Especially in New Orleans with like the Sazerac history and all that kind of thing.
Totally.
Peychaud's,
Antoine Peychaud's pharmacy. And by the way, Antoine Peychaud's great grandnephew is Phil Green, and he became as soon as Anne Rogers, she was then in those days, called us up and said, you should meet this guy named Phil Green. I think he's related to Antoine Peychaud. He said, yes, we should.
This is Anne Turnerman.
Yeah, well, her name was
Anne Rogers at the time,
yeah. And
so she used to, for anyone who's not aware, she used to run Tales of the Cocktail.
She ran it first 15, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't remember when she left, but that's another story for another time.
So describe the Museum of the American Cocktail for anyone who's not been there.
I reconnected with Dr. Cocktail Ted Hay.
Oh, yes.
Of the famous book, which we all love so much, Forgotten Cocktails.
Yes, great book.
And so that was our first call back in 2005. Well, it was Jared and Anastasia. Jared was a captain in the Rainbow.
Yeah, I knew he worked there. Yeah.
In those years
So he worked under you?
No, I was in the bar. He was in the main dining room.
Oh, he was in the dining room.
With me. But,
so he did. So he never worked on the bar there. He was.
No, he didn't. I ran the bars, and I didn't even know him well until after we lost our lease. To tell you the truth, there were 386 employees. I wasn't exactly intimate with all of them. I had my hands full with 38 bartenders.
That's 38 bartenders there.
Well, they had a big part. The whole floor below was a big private dining, 1,000, plus with multiple rooms.
So, well, let's get to that in a second. I want to talk about Rainbow Room. Just going back to Museum of the American Cocktail, so we can tick that one off. So, for anyone who's not been there, just describe exactly what the experience is like.
So that experience was a timeline. Doc put it together as the definition of the cocktail in the Hudson and Balance, Hudson Balance Repository in Hudson, New York.
Which was the 1804. Is it 1804? I think that one was
1806.
1806.
There was another mention in 1803 that David found in the word cocktail being referred to as a beverage, because it had been referred to back in the Johnson days as a cocktail. We had a cocktail it was used as an adjective. We had a cocktail of a punch or something like that, used in another way. And then there was the cocktailing of the horse's tail.
Yeah, that's the 1798 one from England.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it doesn't really kind of refer to it as a drink.
No.
It's just something that was at a pub and called a cocktail, called ginger, I think it was.
Yeah.
Weird, but anyway.
Well, what they did, the whole thing about the horses was that if they had a nag, they'd shove a piece of ginger up her butt. And
Which
she
would
was
do
really
it.
lively for a while.
As you would.
David found that little bit. David, our historical oracle, who has shot lots and lots of holes through lore all these many years.
Yeah.
So anyway,
They've won
the first
much better.
museum lasted a total of 7 months, and we got evicted by Katrina. And it sat there because you couldn't get into New Orleans for 3 months. And when Doc and I finally were able to rent a truck, that was a comical thing. We went to the main U-Haul area. We're driving in there, and it's 10 is up above all of the city. It's on stilts all the way through the city because the city floods all the time. And as we were approaching, I'm saying, "Hey, there's a U-Haul place over there." And as we got closer, we looked at it. There's nobody there, and all the garage doors have been bent and broken, like somebody went in and stole stuff. And all the buildings have a brown line about 6 feet up on them, and all the trucks have a brown line about 6 feet up on them. And we're like, "Okay, let's call U-Haul. Where do you rent your trucks from now?" "Oh, it's on the other side of the garden district back in town. They have a little gas station where they got 15 trucks parked there, right?" So we got one of them. We had a reservation, on a big truck, a big box truck. And T. Adelaide Martin, who was such a godsend, because when we opened the museum in the pharmacy had one of those gateway from the days when carriages were kept in behind the buildings.
Yeah.
That's a big courtyard, and that's where we had our outdoor party. And we kept trying to get a caterer to do this for us, and no one would go with an unknown 501c3. You know what I'm saying? So I called T. Adelaide Martin, who owns Commander's Palace. She's in that family, Miss Ella's daughter. And I said, "T, could you help us out? We're having a hell of a time." She said, "Oh, I'll take care of it. Don't you worry. I'll take care of it." And no word. And it's the day of the party, the day of the opening, And I said, "Look, guys, we got the booze. We'll set tables up. We got the tables. We'll get dips and chips at each bar, and we had planned to make like 6 classics, Hello." And Doc was making one, I was making one, Phil Green, and it was really fun, actually. And as we're setting the bars up, I look through the gateway out to Charter Street, and there's a big truck pulls up, seems to stop right on the other side of our gateway. It opens up, and then a ramp comes down, and there's these crest course coming down the ramp.
So what, coming down the ramp?
Crest course, big things that in traveling food, hot and cold.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got you. Yeah.
The caterers use.
Yeah.
And there's like 3 or 4 guys with toques on, and there's these waiters running around, and I'm like, "Oh shit!" So I ran out there, and I said, "Excuse me, are you setting up for something?" They said, "Yeah, at the Museum of whatever." And I said, "Who are you?" And they said, "Well, she's over there," And I looked and I said, "T." So I go over to T and I said, "T, we don't have a budget for this." She said, "Oh, don't worry. Welcome to town."
Oh, nice.
She just catered the whole thing. So I brought that up because when we pulled up with the truck, there's T and her head bartender, Lou Brow, with their blue jeans and ready to work. It took us all day to pack up, and actually a day and a half. And then Doc and I drove this thing because T also...
And what are you talking about here? Books, cocktail
Oh,
shakers?
God, everything. Old spirits in bottles, from the 19th century. And
where was
the
this stuff come from, by the way? Where was
over half of it from Doc's collection.
Right.
My collection, multiple collections of shaker collectors. Steve Visick, who has one of the largest shaker collections in the world, some folks from Texas who had shaker collections that were friends of his, they all donated stuff to be returned.
Yeah.
Some of it was given to us. Really amazing stuff. I mean, over the top stuff. And so we're being very careful with it. I think it's a very, very careful job, And then, so we're finally ready to go, and Doc and I drive it out. and we take 10, and we took Route 66 for a while. We were looking for an old hotel he wanted to go to, where the movie makers, when they shot films over near the Badlands or whatever they were called, they used to stay all there, and we wanted to check it out. And then we missed a turn. Actually, we missed a sign, and then we found ourselves at the Hoover Dam.
Oh,
Trucks are not allowed to cross the road that goes across the Hoover Dam. Only cars. There's a 4-lane highway across the top of that.
Yeah.
We had to retrack 100 miles all the way around the other side. And we're like, oh, okay. Then we get to the Hotel Aladdin Hotel and Casino, where T has her Commander's Palace in Las Vegas. She has given us the main dining room, but bigger than this room, but the same squarish. Maybe go to the other end of that wall over there. That's it. So Doc has a carpenter engaged, and he's building these lockable glass-fronted cabinets all the way around the dining room. And we install this timeline. 5 months later, the Aladdin Hotel and Casino was purchased by Planet Hollywood Hotel and Casino, and they made T an author she couldn't refuse. And she came to us. She said, "Well, I got good news and bad news. The good news is we're gonna donate $15,000, exactly what we paid to put these in. The bad news is you got to get out.
Gotta get out." So you're like less than 2 years into this project, and already you're onto your third venue.
The New York exhibit, which David Wondrous did all the captures for and designed, and obviously a lot of my artifacts were in that one. We get a theatrical guide to build beautiful cabinets that you could hang and take down in case we wanted to go somewhere else, right? And everything's hunky-dory right up until the moment we find padlocks on the doors. And a little notice from the landlord. Apparently the two guys we rented from were not the landlord. Oh my God.
I mean, it does sound...
Jared, that's on Jared, not a state. They found these two characters, right?
And it does sound a bit cursed.
So Phil, who's an attorney, works in the Pentagon. His job is to be the trademark and patent lawyer from the United States Marines and the U.S. Army. I'm in the United States Navy and Marines. Sends this very, sharp letter saying, we're a museum and these are our artifacts. And if you're not interested in a long litigation, you might just let us in for a day so we can remove our artifacts. So we get a note back. You have 3 hours. Don't touch anything that's built into the wall, which means even though we could lift off those cabinets, we had to leave them because they were fixtures now. And he thought he owned them.
Right.
So we packed up and sent what we had, shipped it down to New Orleans to the other museum. Meanwhile, after we leave, we put our museum in storage. We're talking like good storage where it's temperature controlled in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Because if you put it in a room at 100-degree heat, forget about it. And so then we go back to New Orleans. At Tales of the Cocktail, I run into the woman who worked on the World War II museum in New Orleans and another museum in New Orleans. Her name is Liz. She's a former JAG lawyer. Her name is Liz Williams, and she's a local. And boy, when you're doing business in New Orleans, you need to be with a local. That's why we got into the Pharmacy Museum. And she said, well, we've talked before, I know, and I finally have found a building, and I think you should share with us. We have 22,000 square feet. Katrina closed the Riverwalk Marketplace, which goes from Canal way over to Julia Street. It's a shotgun mall, and it was beautiful. So we walked through, and it was a dress shop, INC. And it's filled with dressing rooms and stuff like that. So we took over the area that was dressing rooms and ripped out all the dressing rooms, and that became our walkthrough exhibit. And she installed the Southern Food and Beverage Museum and the rest. And that's where we built in the first time the Bruni's Bar. We had to disassemble it.
And when was this?
This was, okay, we're 2 years in, so we're at 7, about 2008. We're in there for a good 8 years, 7, 8 years, no rent-free. We're just paying for our electricity because they thought, the people that were trying to get them all back up and running thought that if people had to walk all the way through all the stores and everything to get to the museum, because you would enter usually from the Canal Street entrance, that would mean they'd be walking by all their stores. And there are 3 levels of stores. So they were happy to have us. So that lasted about 8 years, and then used properties, which would used to be the old Hughes Tool Company, Howard Hughes, buys at the Riverwalk Marketplace. And it pretty much evicts everybody. So meanwhile, Liz has been working on it because she knew this was coming. The old grocery markets for the city of New Orleans were 2 big, huge studio-looking, like Hollywood studio-looking buildings at the corner of Aretha Castle Haley and Martin Luther King in a neighborhood that I guess called Central City, not suburban neighborhood, but it's gentrifying slowly.
So like warehouse kind of thing.
Yeah, the city has bought one of them. They're going to turn it into a jazz workshop. She got the other one. We found the money to do we got a good bank loan from a local bank to redo the building and install the bar, a beautiful kitchen. I mean, it's a big, and then another little kitchen in the back, a teaching kitchen, and we proceeded to move along, and we were good for about 2 or 3 years, and then a predatory bank from Miami came in and bought the bank that gave us a real good deal, and they were starting to close on all of the properties that the bank had held and wipe out the loans, But so when they saw our building in the neighborhood that it was in and what was right next to it, they said, well, you guys just pay the interest on the loan and we'll get around to it. We'll figure it out later. We've just this year gotten a rise out of them, and now we're in another stage. It's not over yet.
Okay.
So that's the saga.
That is a saga and a
famous
half, isn't it?
Museum of the American Cocktail, which really doesn't even, it's been absorbed now into something called NATFAB, National Association of Food and Beverage.
Okay.
SOFAB, the Absinthe Museum, which used to be in the quarter, we're all under one roof now.
Right.
There's a beautiful little absinthe cafe in one corner of the museum. And after that is a huge wall-high ceilings. We made shelves for a lot of our going up because it's safe that way. That's where we are. And on the other side of the room, Chef Toops, who has another restaurant down there, took over our bar and the restaurant, which was going to be all around the bar, and operated until COVID. And then he left, just focused on his other place.
Do you remember when you started collecting cocktail books and cocktail equipment?
Yes, I do. And it happens to do with the Rainbow Room.
Cool. Well, let's go back there. But I mean, maybe we should go back even further before the Rainbow Room. So take it back as far as you want.
Oh man, I'm telling you. I was at university in my mother's state, where I was a Navy brat. My dad was what they called a 90-day wonder in the Second World War. In 1945, he was a student in Chicago, good vision, very physically fit, good at math. He was in a technical school, and they were scoping out different young men that fit those, criteria, and offered them officers' commissions as pilots in a program called the 90-Day Wonder, because at day number 90, they were going to be on an aircraft ready to fly. Yeah. This is what my father did. He flew off of aircraft carriers. And
after 90 days of training.
That's how he met my mother at a little training center in Rhode Island, where my son now has a fishing shack. And so after his retirement, we went back to that little town. I finished out my high school. We had finished up in Morocco and Spain, which was cool. I mean, I lived everywhere with him. My dad said to us kids when we embarked on this lifelong, when we were little kids, he said, you're going to see a lot of different kinds of folks, that do things a lot different than we do. And I want you to know that different is not bad. That's all he said about it, So as kids, we'd get into it in Morocco and just jump right in,
That's great, though. What a great sort of education of the world when you're younger, right?
Yeah, for sure. So that really was a nice foundation. And when I was back, my dad was retired, I was back. I'm at university.
What did you study?
Theater arts and English, trying to stay way away from mathematics, because unlike my dad.
Theater arts and English. I mean, that's kind of a bar degree in a way, isn't it?
Precisely, yes.
We'll get back to the show shortly, but first I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, Fever-Tree. Fever-Tree have been my mixer of choice for more than a decade now, going right back to when I used them as our mixer at 15 in Cornwall in 2005. It's a very long time ago. This is a brand, of course, that made its name with tonic water, but to be honest with you, the thing that's going to be most excited at the moment is their range of ginger mixers. They have ginger beer, ginger ale, and then this product here, which is possibly my favorite in the entire range. Fever-Tree Spiced Orange Ginger Ale. The product starts out just like their normal ginger ale, flavored with 3 unique gingers that harmoniously come together for a nice citric, zesty, but also subtly spicy ginger effect. Then 2 more ingredients are added: cinnamon for a nice baking spice hum, and then fresh clementine, which really extends that citric flavor and adds weight and body to this ginger ale. I would happily drink this stuff on its own, but of course it's a mixer, and it's best served with a nice whiskey, extending out into a highball and adding some real length and depth to it. Now's the time to crack it out.
So here's what happened. In my junior year, I was doing well. I was on the dean's list. In my junior year, I wasn't doing well in high school, but I jumped in, and I didn't have to take any of those required technical courses until the end, and I managed to avoid that. But in our junior year, we mounted a play by a young playwright and took it to the Yale Drama Festival. It was a 2-person play. It was an odd sort of a play where there are two very disturbed young people, an older sister and a younger brother the older sister can deal with the world, the younger brother can't. That's the part I played. The set designer brilliantly made huge oversized furniture, like the chairs we had to climb up on, the dining room chairs we had to climb up on. We were like,
So you look like children. Yeah.
It was brilliant. And she ends up dying because I'm afraid to leave the apartment. She's 6 months pregnant, 9 months pregnant, probably by me. You know, they don't actually say that.
That's a serious implication.
But yeah, so it's a 1-act play too. It all happens, in front of your eyes in an hour. And she keeps saying, it's okay, you got to go out. And I'm like, I can't go out, and then that's how it ends with her dying in the chair, But anyway, the New Yorker magazine drama critic, an old man in his 80s at the time, saw it and did a little paragraph in it when he got to back where he would write, on the road, in the Berkshires or wherever the theater was happening in different times of year. And he said, best thing at the Drama Festival was a small play from the University of Rhode Island, named all of us, right? And I went back to the university, packed my bags, jumped on a train, and moved into the Sloan House. It was 34th and 8th.
Huh.
And
Not far from here at all.
No, walking distance.
Yeah.
And with my backpack and my guitar and nothing else. And I was paying for a lot of my...
So you thought, I want to be an actor?
No. Yes. And I was paying for a lot of my university, so I didn't feel too bad about... I didn't call my mother and father, to tell you the truth. I was working construction and making good money in the summer times, And so I moved into the Sloan House and now get an apartment and now get a job. And luckily, and this is the beginning of the serendipitous part of my life, my best friend back in Rhode Island was a writer and a poet. And we were in high school that last year. I had met him years before when I got stuck in Rhode Island for a while because my dad was on a long Mediterranean tour and they put us at a Catholic school down there. I met him then. And he was a big guy, a boxer, but he stopped growing because he had severe asthma and the medication stunted his growth. So he was bigger than us and then we were bigger than him, if you know what I mean. And his brothers, it was a really Eugene O'Neill family. His brothers it was an Irish family. One was a brilliant jazz piano player. I mean, brilliant. He didn't want to make it his life, but he brought major jazz stars in who wanted to play with him. I mean, I'm talking like Harry Sweets Edison and Marshall Brown and Little Jazz Roy Eldridge and Jimmy McFarland and oh my God, the top people. And now those names don't mean anything to anybody today, but they were like Roy Eldridge, for example, was the lead trumpet player in the Gene Krupa Band and the only black man.
Right.
Third youngest, and Jerry was like 15 years younger than any of them, was a hotshot advertising guy in New York City at an agency called Lois, Holland, and Calloway. I had met Ron because we would come on junkets to New York, and Ron would host us because he did the Restaurant Associates advertising.
Okay.
Now, Restaurant Associates advertising was a brilliant account because you could wine and dine
I see.
your other clients in the most sought-after reservations in town. The Four Seasons in the Seagrams building, the Forum of the 12 Caesars, which was recreated, that dining room in Mad Men.
Oh, yeah.
La Fonda del Sol, and I'll talk about these places in detail, but I called Ron, and I had a drink with him, and I said, how you doing? All right. Maybe I got something for you at the agency over here. We'll take a look, and he didn't call me back for a while, so I got a job packing Gideon Bibles into boxes downtown in the industrial area, right? And just a miserable job. I had
pretty repetitive.
Had little fun stuff sticking a Playboy for centerfold into the Bible once in a while. And then I got a job putting up posters in the middle of the night, which lasted a very short amount of time because there's professionals who do that in the middle of the night, and they do not take kindly to amateurs getting out there. and they'll hurt you.
So when did you get?
Because there are certain spots they want them.
When did you get behind a bar then?
It's coming. And then I'm walking in Times Square. I walk by Howard Johnson's, the flagship at the time, Howard Johnson's, Help Wanted. So I walk in and I said, is the manager? And yeah, he's in the back over there. And I find him and I said, so I see you're hiring. He said, no. So it says Help Wanted. Well, that's dishwasher man. Yeah, I mean, and he said, well, you speak English. Does that mean I can get the job? I was such a babe in the woods. I didn't know what he was talking about. You know what I mean? It was comical. And he said, I can have the job if you want. Sure, yeah. That's how I have to stop for a minute and talk to you about a moment I had many, many years later. Jacques Pepin's daughter, I'm trying to remember her name now. Anyway, I met her on the street one day. We knew each other from wine tastings and stuff. And she said, "What you doing?" I said, "I'm just." She said, "What? You know my dad? Have you ever met my dad?" Oh God! I said, "I'd love to meet your dad." You know, this is when I'm at the Rainbow, right? And so she said, "Come with me." And we go there, and he's signing one of his cookbooks, right? And there's a line of people, so we go over and have a drink. And then when the line gets down to the end, she brings me over and says, "Dad, this is Dale DeGroff from the Rainbow Room. Oh, je Baum, the Rainbow Room, the hot shit cocktail. Yeah, I know you." I said, well, actually, got to tell you the truth, Jacques, I started at Times Square in Howard Johnson's. I too started in this place. And I said, Chuck, really, come on. He said, no. This is how I come to America. This is Howard Johnson's company. They make the hotels. When they make the hotels, they bring me to come to this place to make these dishes, like the fried clams and all these. And I said, oh my God, Chuck. We were colleagues. You were making the dishes. I was washing them.
No way.
No shit.
That is funny.
And I went on to end up doing the cocktails for his for about 3 years recently for his big fundraiser where they raised like $1 million sitting auctioning off all kinds of stuff, and they have fancy cocktails.
So you were how old when you started pot washing there?
I was 21. No, I'm sorry, I was 20 because I left college early, and that comes into play with one of my jazz stories because my friend Jerry Holland came to town. We were looking for an apartment together because he wanted to come into the town. And I said, you got to come this weekend because Little Jazz Roy Eldridge, who we saw with your brother, the famous, is downtown at the Half Note, which was a single restaurant property in what was a flat out manufacturing area at that time. It's Soho now. And it was Spring and Hudson. And, those buildings are multi-million dollars. This was just a little jazz club on a corner. And Roy and the band, all black except for one white guy, stood on a big shelf over the bar on this side, and the corner is there. And there's a big dining room over here so that the band could swing back and forth and play for both sides. And the people in the dining room would hear the yahoos in the bar, And so as we, and by the way, if you know the Fats Waller song, no one to talk with, all by myself, no one to walk with, I'm happy on the shelf. That's what he was referring to. And
that's the show.
Because a lot of the bands had that because they could do that with the dining room. And as we were walking in the door and as the guy was carting us, it was 18 then. You had the right as a fancy adult place, which it definitely was, to refuse under 21. So the guy's about to wave me away. And Roy goes here and he sees Jerry because his brother, and he recognizes Jerry and he goes, hey, those cats are with me. We're like, whoa.
Wow,
in we go.
That's a great jazz nightclub moment.
I'm telling you, it changed my life. So we're sitting at the bar and we're there till 4 a.m. And by the way, all the clubs played half hour on, half hour off till 4 a.m. And that was it. I mean, you did that. That's the way it was. You could set your watch to it. Even the ones on the Swing Street up here, same schedule.
What were you drinking?
Beer. That's all we could afford. Are you kidding me?
I wasn't expecting you drinking martinis, but I don't know if it's wine, beer.
We were dead broke, both of us. Anyway, I think Mousy Alexander, the drummer, bought us a beer at the end of the night, because he came down and he says, we were screaming our heads off. He said, you guys helped make it happen. You got the room fired up, And then about 2 weeks later, I'm thinking about what Mousy said, and it occurred to me that this is New York, baby. And you really can't go out looking for a good time. unless you bring some of that good time in the door with you. That's what New York is. You got to invest.
Yeah.
And it's like the bars. My first neighborhood bar, when I thought I had an apartment, I'm sitting in this wonderful old Irish bar across from the soap opera studio up there at 69th in Columbus, which was a shithole then, which is a beautiful neighborhood now. It's this old, beautiful Irish building and this beautiful glass square mahogany ceiling of collector's items. There were already 13 of them in the whole area, that guy who did those, and a massively beautiful bar and an old 70-year-old Austrian bartender, big tall guy, Al, and the little short guy sitting in the return of the bar in the corner there looks at, I walked in with my backpack and my guitar because I thought I was going to get an apartment. And by the way, when I left, the guy at the Sloan House told me, don't leave your stuff in your room, Even though it's your room, don't leave your stuff in the room.
Yeah.
Because it'll be gone. So across from us, Penn Station, and they had, in those days before terrorism, you could rent a locker. So every morning, I would put all my stuff in a locker.
Wow. So you had to go to the station.
It was a quarter.
Secure your items for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I took all my items up there because I was meeting this girl who worked in a restaurant next door. So I might be there at midnight or I might be there at 2 a.m. I'm not sure, it could be late, So I have $2.50 in my pocket and the beers are 50 cents. And Al comes out. And when the door opened with me with my long hair and my guitar and my back out, every eye in the room looked at me, kind of like a side dish they hadn't ordered. You know what I mean? And there's the old guy up in the corner up there growling, And Al, on the other hand, smiles at me. And I walk in, I sit down at the bar, and I said, "What'll it be, young man?" He still had his Austrian accent. "What'll it be, young man?" And I said, "A beer," And I knew I had to give this guy $1. Christ, now I'm down to $1.50, right? So I'm hoping she's in by midnight, And at midnight, she's not there. And so I have to invest in another beer. I got $1 now. I need Subway fare. And this is getting really, I ended up walking miles in those days.
Right.
And the guy next to me, an old guy, says, "So kid, you play this guitar?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, play something for us." And I could see the owner over there going, "What the fuck, But I'll tell you something about those kind of bars. It's Al that kept those seats full. And Al encouraged me. He would never overrule Al. Because Al was the man. He was the boss when he was behind that bar. And so I got off the guitar and I played "Your Cheating Heart," which is the only thing I knew the lyrics to all the way through that I could play.
Who sang that originally? I can hear it.
Hank Williams.
Hank Williams, right. And it's
so
got that real curl.
I see a little tear going down this guy's cheek when I finish. And he says, "Give the kid a beer, Al, and play it again, man." 3 more beers, 3 more renditions. She comes in at like 1:45 to tell me that she's decided in a phone call that evening with her boyfriend that he should move in. And there goes my apartment.
No.
But it made a lot of nice stories. And it introduced me to what would become, we lived in that neighborhood, my friend Jerry and I, what would become our bar. And we went back there together. I said, "You got to see this place." When I first was in town, we ended up on 74th Street, around the corner in a basement apartment, where we shared like a couch and a bed and a kitchen that's behind a little sliding door. We never ate there. And it was a terrible neighborhood. You walk down the middle of the street if you went to a bar till 4 a.m, you went down the middle of the street till you got even with and then you ran over with your key in your hand, Because guys would hide under the stoops with these like carpet knives. They put them like that. So give me everything you got, And you gave everything I got. And so I said, "I'm taking you to this place. You're just going to love this place." There was a big, beautiful mural over here. And above the bar, there was a triple heat to win that Al had won.
A what?
Triple heat to win. In other words, 3 horses. Do you know how they have photo finishes at racetracks? 3 horses with their noses all exactly on the line. So it pays a lot of money to a lot of people. That tracks hate it. They'll try to fudge it but if it's obvious to everybody that it's all the horses. And there's the picture from the Associated Press that they've blown up and given to Al.
Right.
Of his big win.
Yeah.
So it was an amazing place. So we're sitting there, and while we're sitting there, smoke starts getting in the room, up high, high ceilings. And finally it's getting down a little lower, and Al goes, Patty McGlade, the owner. It's called McGlade's. Patty. And he goes, oh. Well, call the fire department now. Nobody moves. Nobody
try and find the
moves.
source
Terry
of
and
the
I are
fire.
looking at each other. Another beer, you know.
It's pretty lazy, really. I mean, like, come on.
So the fire department, there's a side door and there's the corner door. They troop in both doors with all their equipment and their things and everything like that. And the smoke gets really low, and the customer's starting to complain now. And Jesus, Al, what's going on, man? And so they put out the fire. The smoke goes back up again, and Al says, "Put a couple pictures out there by the door there, for the fellas, you know, that come out." And they all come out. They all stop, finish the pictures of beer, back to work. And this is when we looked at each other and said, "Yeah, this will be our neighborhood bar."
Nice. So when did the first bar job happen?
Well, there were a series of mishaps, but
Let's not go through all of them.
one of them-
we haven't got that long.
one of them was a goofy thing where I got fired for stealing because the owner wanted to hire his nephew.
Right.
And it was called Hobos, Hobeaus, and the Frenchier sounding the name, the divier, the bar.
Yeah.
But they were cool guys. They were fishermen. They would bring in fast fish, and they had a kind of interesting clientele. Jake LaMotta used to hang out there, and he was a scary guy. So the next, well then, this is when I started to get really lucky. We were still going out to dinner with Ron. I mean, we were like his audience. You know, we had this drinking club on Sundays at Charlie O's, which was in Rockefeller Center, very high-end Irish. I mean, I'm talking money. You know, really amazing chef. You know, but it was also still you could get the poached fin and hattie and all that stuff. Those classic, but made really. Joe Baum. It was a Joe Baum restaurant. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're going to get there.
So Ron Holland, who's doing all of Joe's advertising, just signs the check everywhere we go. So he's happy to take us out at a time, you know. And so we have this drinking club where we have brunch, but we all drink for a long, long time, and then we go sit down.
So you're getting exposed to all these pretty fancy places. You're getting a kind of taste.
Oh my God, are you kidding me? Where my portion of the dinner, we went to the Four Seasons, my portion of the dinner was more than our rent for the month.
Wow.
You know, and I remember being at the Four Seasons with Ron, and we finished dinner and went up to the balcony to have overlooking the bar to have after dinner drinks, and Ron's drinking something called Paul William, and I said, "Well, I'll have the same thing, you know." And he said, "Okay." And it comes, and I smell it. It smells like pear. So I go, "Oh, it's like 90, you know."
Yeah. I mean, Paul really.
45 ABV.
Paul Williams, no joke. Like,
That was my first introduction to eau de vie. As a shooter.
The whole thing.
And Ron's looking at me like, "What?" Ron was the guy, I will be honest with you, that taught me what to drink, when to drink it, how to treat the bartender, how he should treat you, you know.
So you're basically getting lessons in hospitality from the guest's perspective.
And then I get a job at the agency, and that's the first time I'm at table with the famous Joe Baum. We go to a new place called Spats that he opened. It was one of his failures.
Spatz.
Yes, you wear.
Yeah, with the white,
And it was fancy. It was high end. But across the street was Gleason's Gym, where a lot of fighters right around, it's with 33 West 33rd Street, and the fights were over 34th Street. And Joe thought he could sort of slum the neighborhood because rich people would, think it's kind of cool maybe to peek into the gym because it was a 24-hour gym. And, well, that was a little too early. The place lasted 6 months. But I was at table with him that night. And it was comical. It was Ron and some other the ad guys on one side. It was Joe and some of his people on this side, and Jerry and I, acting as the sort of audience for Ron's funny stories, And we were
playing your role,
cannon fodder. But anyway, we for his wit actually. And I'm watching Joe. Every dish on the menu comes to the table. And Joe's looking at it, calls the guy over. What? That's not right. Steak. What is this garnish? This is not no, this is not it. Look at the menu. Look at the notes. And then he sticks his hand in some sauces. Picks up a potato, crumbles the potato.
Really? He's testing the potato with his hand.
Yeah. Oh yeah, everything, all textures and once in a while he would put something in his mouth.
Maybe it's because there's so much food, he can't eat everything, so he's got to kind of use his hands.
He had
and,
spent, for 30 years, James Beard and him and Albert Stockley, and then later another chef named Andre Rene, would sit around in kitchens in one of their operations planning these things meticulously, and he wanted everything. I mean, he talks, in the presentation I did yesterday at Tales of the Cocktail, I quoted many of his quotes. And
maybe it's worth just right now, it's just sort of saying who Joe was and what he was for the restaurant.
so he was the owner. No, I'm sorry. He was in those days, the president of Restaurant Associates, which was a weird company. There was a family named the Wexler family who owned a monopoly on coffee before coffee was what it is today in restaurants, in cafes, in cafeterias, and a lot of they ended up owning some properties because people couldn't pay their bills, like cafeterias, and so they hired his son-in-law, a guy named Jerry Brody, who went into the business big time, and Jerry hired a staff, including Joe, who by then was pretty well known for other reasons, and he put him in charge of new projects. And that's when he started building these extraordinary restaurants. First one, 1953, in Newark Airport, called the Newarker, a fine dining restaurant with skewers of flaming grill going through the dining room. Your tableside windows are here, and the DC-9 is right there with people going up the stairs.
This is when air travel was sort of a luxury experience, right?
Yeah,
so,
brand new.
Yeah.
And everybody laughed at this idea, and they laughed right until the limousines started lining up out front, not to fly anywhere,
just going there to eat.
To go there and eat from New York to Newark,
Aye.
It became a really big deal. Then they were like, within a very short 2-month period, series of 3 DC-9 crashes. They shut the whole airport down for like months to get to the bottom of what the hell was going on.
Right.
Because that was the plane that everybody flew,
Yeah.
And the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey decided not to renew these kinds of leases until they sorted out what was going on with the airport. So that's when it closed and never reopened. But meanwhile, in 1959, 58, Edgar Bronfman Sr., the owner of Seagrams, is building this extraordinary building designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. The construction supervisor is one of today's most famous architects, Philip Johnson. Even though he didn't work in this country, like Corbusier, that guy who invented the skyscraper, was kind of a consultant on this place. And it was amazing. Why? For a lot of reasons. It was a black glass building, 38 stories tall, and all the other buildings were like pre-war or turn of the century or pre-19th century. It reflected in this glass wall on all sides.
Yeah, so like modern skyscraper with that reflective effect. Yeah.
So what is Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, with permission from Edgar Bronfman, he puts 2 gigantic pools the size of this room between Park Avenue and the front of the building. Fountains and beautiful buildings, Okay, let's think about that. This is an aesthetic decision that's going to impact the rent that building can charge over the next 100 years if they had gone out to the sidewalk like every other building on Park Avenue. This was a decision. And so Joe, working on first of all, there wasn't going to be a restaurant there. Edgar Bronfman Sr. wanted a Cadillac dealership there, and his daughter's husband, Jerry, who's worked in the company, Restaurant Associates, as president then, they're saying, Dad, this is Park Avenue, all the dealerships are over on 11th. Did you ever see it? But it's Cadillac, he said. It's Cadillac, right? It's glass, right? So yeah, but that won't make any difference to the people who live here, It'll be a car dealership to them, right? Yeah. And so they bring Joe in, and Joe has this marvelous idea, and they've been working with Van der Rohe, and he's been, and so they show drawings, stupendous drawings, and there's the pool is included in the drawing, and they're all looking at it and say, but there's a beam where that pool is going to be, a support beam. And I said, we worked it out with Ludwig. It's coming out. Joe asked Ludwig to remove his support beam. He wanted
to stick the restaurant in there.
He wanted the pool there,
right,
in the center of the dining room,
right,
to pay tribute to those pools that, another aesthetic decision. The Four Seasons was probably the most extraordinary collaboration between Joe and James Beard and Albert Stockley, their chef at the time, because that's the time when they went towards a lighter. They were looking. All the 4-star restaurants were always French and maybe a few Italian. There were no American chefs doing this, and James was a famous chef. You know, they were just they thought there is a cuisine. There's an American cuisine, and we're gonna get to this. And that's, you know, like one of Joe's people at that time was a guy named Michael Whiteman, and he was a writer, and he created Restaurants and Institutions magazine, a newspaper. It was a magazine, then a newspaper, whatever. And Joe hired him because of he was a wordsmith. And he said, I want menus that Americans can read, you know. So, you know, every other menu in town said beef bourguignon. He wanted his menu. And so Michael Whiteman, his name was, said, well, how about we say beef braised in red wine sauce? An American order, then understand it, you know. And so that's what they did. They thought, they didn't necessarily eschew all those styles and dishes and everything, although they started to move away from the heavy sauces. They started to make contracts with growers in New Jersey, the best tomatoes.
So you describe it as sort of a moving away from French food and towards like more modern American cooking. Yeah.
And meanwhile, this is 1959 when they open. It wasn't until 1969 that two guys, Henri Gault and Christian Malot, the eponymous guide they had in Paris, the Gault and Malot guide, were starting to notice a lot of young French chefs were moving in a similar direction, away from heavy sauces, letting the food speak, getting more modern about the equipment and stuff they allow in the kitchen. And they called it Nouvelle Cuisine, and it came across the pond, you know. So Joe, 9 years before this even had a name, is doing Nouvelle Cuisine here. He would never have called it that because that was a French name, you know. It was an American cuisine, but they wanted an American cuisine, not a North American cuisine. So the next place they open is right here on 6th Avenue, in not far up the avenue here, the Time Life building that had been built that same year. Well, that was finished in 59. This was finished in 60. So he's working on simultaneously two huge. He was never, ever afraid of a big project because he had a meticulous, managed, you know, approach to everything, and he had a very broad management structure. Always, he always hired more managers than any other restaurant.
So it's protocols, it's systems,
unbelievably so. And from the very early on, he had these grid ceilings that cost a lot. Believe me, the stuff he did needed a big budget restaurant, but it's something that other restaurants could do in a much cheaper way. But these grids in the ceiling had hundreds of lights, and like in the Rainbow Room was called the Rainbow Room because of the circle of lights, and he took advantage of that. But in the Four Seasons, the tables don't move around. They're in set places in that dining room and always will be there. They can push them together sometimes, but usually what they would do is add new tops to them to make them a little bigger, because the dining rooms are a little more roomy in those days in high-end dining. And the tables, you know, you like to have atmosphere in a restaurant, not so much early on for the first seating, but maybe as evening goes on, perceptibly the lights would change, perceptibly, because Joe spent weeks with the lighting designers, designing automatic, you know, or at least with a push of a button, the change of the atmosphere.
You've got to, especially in buildings like this, where you've got all this window and the sun goes down and the light starts to change. You've got to change it, you know.
La Fonda del Sol. The first thing Joe noticed when he walked into the ground floor, it was on the ground floor of the Time Life building, because they had those ground floors in these buildings are like 3 stories tall. They had these huge glasses, and Joe happened to walk in just at high noon, and he's blinded, and he looks at the sun is reflecting the building across the street and just bathing the whole fucking room with beautiful light, and he stopped in his tracks. Joe started in Shine restaurants in Florida right out of restaurant school. He went to Cornell, and he had a couple little jobs. He worked for the Zeckendorf company, a building company, which was really important part. And then he went to work for. Have you ever heard of the name Norman Belgettis? Norman Belgettis was a futurist. You think all the futurists were Italians? They weren't. Norman Belgettis was one of these guys that did future designs. One of them hung over our bar at the Rainbow Room. Ocean liner that could travel the North Atlantic of the winter. It had a big cover over the top of it. And at working, he met so many young designers that he hired over and over and over again, to do these kinds of very modern things then. So what they did with these lighting on these tables is the tables would glow no matter how big they are, but because of the way these pin spots were focused on the table and the colors they use. So people are leaning in and everybody looks great, number one. And number two, you can read your damn menus. You don't need a friggin' flashlight they didn't have cell phones then to read the damn menu, call the waiter over, And I always know when it's improperly lit dining room, people are pulling out their phones. You know what I'm saying? And yet, even though the glow is nice here and everything is visible, right here it's sexy and kind of atmospheric. Shadow.
It's cool.
It's just the way he designed it. Every single one of his restaurants. It's extraordinary what he did.
Let's jump to the Rainbow Room. I know we're sort of talking about it a little bit. So that originally opened in 34, straight after Prohibition, I think.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
So was it 60th floor of the
And it was called Rockefeller Center, so it was opened by them.
Yeah.
65.
65th floor of the Rockefeller Center.
Yeah.
And it had a bit of a heyday, right? In the kind of
huge
40s, 50s.
It was Hollywood.
Yeah.
They had sweeping stairways that went up behind the band, The maitre d' stand, you went up to the Mount Olympus and then down into the dining room, which was a pit, which was a revolving, beautifully inlaid with a star of inlaid mahogany and other fancy woods that rotated very, very slowly all night long.
Yeah.
These giant wooden rollers, right? And then the dining room was tiered,
So you kind of got this amphitheater almost thing.
And the band went up on this side, and they had obviously all the great bands of the era played there, from Goodman to, but you name it. I mentioned Krupa's band, the only black band in the band. And so everybody and Hollywood stars and Hollywood copied it in sets. It was just, this is Joe, right? No, it wasn't Joe. I'm sorry. This is
before Joe.
Before Joe.
Yeah.
But this is Joe, because when Joe was in Cornell, the reason I said that is because when Joe was in Cornell, they had a junket to look at design. The first place they went
was the Rainbow Room.
During the day when it was closed, and they walked around that room. And Charlie...
And this would have been in the 30s or 40s?
No. Yes, it would have been when they reopened after the war, because they closed
war.
during the Second World War.
Yeah. So late
and they
40s.
reopened in 1949 or 50. And this would have been when he was at school, and he would have come through, and Charles, his son, said that he made a vow to himself that someday, if not this place, someplace just like this,
And it turned out it was that place and many other places besides.
So I didn't exactly go to work for him at the Rainbow Room. I was working at one of the most beautiful hotels in the world at the time. By now, I had decided to be a bartender.
Yeah.
And
because you were out in LA for a bit?
I was. That's when I decided to be. I was out to be an actor, but I was working in one of the top 10 hotels in the world. It was called the Hotel Bel Air,
yes.
Stone Canyon. And it was still owned by the original owner, Joe Drown, who died about 7 months after and that's where I started to learn about cocktails, because, I knew about cocktails, but I started learning about really high end. I got the job because I had some intel that they had fired the day man there. And this was before HR departments, way before. It's 1978, I'm out there. And so I hopped in my 1969 Dodge Dart and parked it with a valet guy, went over the arched swan pond and looking for the bar. It's a little sign bar, follow it, all bungalows and beautiful Japanese gardens that were stunning. I learned about them later. They were famous. And you didn't have to walk through a lobby, you can go straight to your room, you can drive up behind your room at park. And so I follow the signs to the bar. I walk in, it's a stunning bar, fireplace, grand piano in the center, little odd shape here. And there's this big red-faced Irishman behind the bar, Jim Kitchens. He's the executive bartender who does not want to be there. He looks like a substitute teacher because he's the executive bartender. He plans the weddings for Reagan's kid, He doesn't stand behind a bar. And I walk in at the right moment, and I said, "Hi, I heard you were looking for a day guy." Pause.
A day guy is just someone who runs the bar on the day shift.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a hotel bar.
You need someone in the day. Yeah.
So, come here. Where did you work before? Well, actually, the coolest job I've had in my life so far was at a Joe Baum restaurant called Charlie O's in Rockefeller Center. He'd heard of it. It was Joe, because Joe was famous. So, come on around behind the bar. Just pour me a shot of anything. wanted to see how I was going to do it, right? So I poured him a shot. And then he asked me to make a drink, and I made it.
What was it? Do you remember?
I think it was a sidecar, and I knew how to make it. But you know why I knew how to make it? Because everybody had everybody. From the fanciest places down.
In New York at that time, everyone was drinking sidecars.
But no, I'm saying, that's not the direction I'm going in. After Prohibition, there was no skilled labor. So this thing in 1937 called 7-Eleven mix came out, which was an artificial sour mix. It was like fire, and then there were a million brands of it, and went around the country. Bag-and-Box came a little bit later, but it was in gallons, in powdered pouches that you mixed with water, and I'm sure you remember. And so even in fancy places, there was, so you could make a side. Pour in the brandy?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so fresh juices at that time just wasn't really a thing behind the bar. No.
Well, that's Joe. So I get the gig. And when I get there the first morning, he outfits me, black pants, white, but he gives me the jacket, tie they use, and they says, okay, Joe Johnson's in that corner table up there, and I'm going to show you how to make his martini right now, and this is what you got to learn, okay? Because it's got to be perfect. We have these little ramekins. Just put crushed ice in there. I got a little 4-ounce carafe. Stick it on the crushed ice. And I want you to make it in this martini glass, chilled. Pour most of the drink into that carafe. Walk to the table, present the little side caviar plate with an olive and a twist. When we made the martini, he doesn't reach for vermouth, he reached for La Iña.
Okay.
Fino Sherry.
Yeah.
I said, oh, okay. This is what you got to use. So he says, first I want you to rinse the glass with it, and then I want you to put, a dash of it in, and then this is the vermouth. I said, okay. And then when you get to the table, you pour.
From the carafe?
No, because you're walking over there with your jigger thing, with your glass too.
Right.
So you pour the rest of what's in your mixing glass into his glass.
Right.
And then you slide that little thing over to him, and you just walk away.
And then he's got a carafe with some in as well. Yeah.
Yes, most of it.
It's quite a cool serve though, right?
Yeah.
With all the little components and elements to it.
And walk away and keep an eye on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it turned out to be one of the most amazing jobs I've ever had in my life. I mean, Harry Nielsen was at the bar every single day. He became a really good friend.
He's Harry Nielsen. Excuse my ignorance. Who's that?
Oh, I can't live in this
okay.
without, or
Right, yeah,
everybody's talking at me.
Yeah, okay.
That's
Yeah,
Harry.
no,
Harry ended up owning all his music rights. That's why he was living in Bel Air.
Right.
He was with RCA, and he was a banker before he was a musician. He worked for Citibank, and he was smart, and he cut deals. He didn't do any tours like rock bands do today. He just owned his music. He didn't have to do tours because he was making money because he had a couple of hits and that was the end of that. He had plenty of money coming in. But so the stories just, oh my God, about this place. I'll give you one amazing story because everybody went. If you wanted to be seen, you went out on Sunset Boulevard to the Beverly Hills Hotel. They made movies about it and everything. If you didn't want to be seen or you didn't want people to know you were in town, you went to the Hotel Bel Air, 60 rooms. And you had to have stayed there to get a room. You knew somebody who stayed there. Half of the rooms in the early days were owned by Howard Hughes, who lived in the neighborhood. It was his neighborhood. He created the Bel Air Patrol because he wanted his guests to have a place to stay. So Joe Drown got a real boon. He opens his restaurant. Howard Hughes walks in and says, I want half of these permanently. Just send me an invoice. How about that? Oh my God.
That's crazy.
He kept trying to expand the hotel and he wasn't able to.
But it's the discreet option, basically. You want to kind of hide away a little bit. Yeah.
Totally. And so Vladimir Horowitz is staying in the hotel. He comes in with his wife, and there was one table in the lounge that from the bar you could actually, because the lounge wall, the wall of the lounge went back that way, and they were in that corner table, which was very cozy. And so they didn't want to dine outside. It was they felt too windy or whatever, because outside was beautiful with bougainvillea over the top of the dining area and the main dining room over there. So I took their order. I didn't know who it was, by the way. I don't know who the hell this was. And that morning, I hadn't met Bud Herman, the piano player who played with Benny Goodman. That's a great story. But he called me that morning and he said, you're the new guy, right? I want you to keep an eye on the piano. I broke the lock on the Steinway last night and I don't want anybody banging on the piano. I said, oh, no. Okay, Mr. Herman, fine. So I served the guy, and I'm losing track, and you know what I was doing? I was polishing bottles because that was my job. He said, "I want jewels, not bottles. I want jewels." This is Jim Kitchen. This, and then on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then over there on Thursday and Friday. And this, don't forget what's on top of there, because it's the most important ones, because all the big cognacs are up there. So I lose track of this gentleman, and then his ass just hit the piano stool, and he's raising the fall board of the piano. And and I ran over and I said, "Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry. You know, I've just had a call from Bud Herman. I'm sure you know Bud because you probably stay here often. And Bud broke the lock on the Steinway last night, and he was hoping that I could keep the piano until he can fix the lock. So, because at night he always invites people to play, and I'm sure if you come back tonight, he would love to have you play." And I went back, and so then I go get there. I bring them a check. I got his card, and I get back to the thing, and I call up the desk and I say, "Vladimir Horowitz, is this the guy I've heard of? You know?" They say, "Yeah, Mr. Horowitz is in town for his concert. You know, one of the top piano players in the 20th century." So I ran back to the table and I said, "Mr. Horowitz, I don't think Bud had you in mind when he gave me that." And he said,
"Don't let anyone touch
said,
Steinway."
No, young man, you don't understand. I travel with my piano, and I completely respect Mr. Herman's. I'm the only person, the only dumbass who ever told Vladimir Horowitz
can't play the
not
piano.
to play the piano." Oh, my God. I could have had a private concert, you know. I just kicked myself for weeks after. I told the story to Bud, and he just couldn't stop.
That's funny.
I finally got the night shift. Bud, who said to me one day, "You know, Dale, I know you're still looking at this acting thing as a career and everything. I got to tell you, you got a real knack for this bartending thing." I'm not going to say anything else. And he walked away.
Sometimes that's the sort of thing you need, the sort of affirmation that from someone else who says, "You know what? You can do this. You're good at this."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Yeah."
You don't think of yourself as being good. You're just doing a job.
You're just doing your job. But when you get that praise, I had it when I was younger as a bartender, like one of my first or second bar jobs, first cocktail bar job. And someone was like, "You're good at making cocktails." And I was like, "Okay, maybe I'll do this." You know?
Exactly.
And then the rest is history.
Exactly.
So let's go to the Rainbow Room. So it's 87. You're back in New York. And now I read...
I left that job, by the way, because Bud Herman died.
Right, okay.
Anyway, I was going to become a partner in a restaurant. The steward at the hotel and his mates, they called themselves Le Clan Ordinaire. They wanted to have a restaurant in Emeryville or the Berkeley area. Berkeley was too expensive, so they settled in Emeryville. And I was going in. I went up for 2 weeks to do the little search with them and everything. I had 2 children by then. I met my wife in New Yorker. We had 2 children in Hollywood Presbyterian. I got health insurance at the Hotel Bel Air. Everything was working out, you know, serendipitous.
So you're planning on sticking around
My
there.
life has been serendipitous, one event after another. And I looked around, and I wasn't so serendipitous about finding a job with insurance. I went to the big hotels, and one of the bartender leaned over the bar and he said, "You know something, mate? There's like 150 people waiting for this job. And every major hotel has about 150 people waiting for those jobs. They're good union jobs. And there are about, 50 people that have to die before you even get close to having it." And I'm like,
You're 50th in line.
So I went to Paul and I said, "Paul, I don't think this is going to work out." And my friend Jerry Holland, Ron's brother, the ad man, still working for Joe,
Right.
calls me up and says, "Joe's looking for a head bartender at this little French place on 49th Street called Aurora. You got to get back here right now." So I went home and I said, "Jill, I'm going to fly to New York. I'm going to put some, I'll come back and then I'll pack up, and then you go to New York, stay with your mom, and I'll join you. We'll find a place to live because I'm going to be getting a head bartender's job with a union wage, with a health insurance and everything." And so I had my first interview with Joe, and he says, "So, what I want is a late 19th century, early 20th century cocktail program. No fresh, no soda guns or any of that crap. I want only fresh juices, everything fresh. I want you to find recipes in research that are if not original, the best. Because sometimes the original is not the best. I want you to find the best recipe, and we'll have tastings, But and I said, "Oh, okay." And I'm a sour mix guy because it's what I did with all my bars, and I'm starting to cover my bases a little bit. I said, if we get really busy, there's some premium sour mixes that come in a bottle and chilled, maybe we should. And he stopped me in my tracks. He said, do you think they had those?
In the 19th century.
At the 19th century, yeah. I said, no, I guess not. I said, if you can't figure out how to do this, I can find somebody who can. I said, no, I got this, Joe. I got this. Believe me, I got it. Joe knew me, by the way. He remembered me from being at a table with him.
Really?
Yes. Because the last thing he said to me was, first he said to me, if you're confused about how to do this, get a book by Jerry Thomas called How to Mix Drinks. And I said, okay. And the last thing he said to me was, I know you know the stories because you're Ron's friend. Tell the stories. And then he walked away. I got the gig. I had to wait a long time because it wasn't finished. They were working on it then. And it's an amazing gig. But there's a big copper thing full of champagne, and the chef is 2-star Michelin, Gerard Pangot, and this the wines of Burgundy. And what the hell am I working on here? I had a drink I created called the Ritz Cocktail for our little menu here, but Joe wanted me to keep showing him stuff, and I was doing that slowly, and I'm not understanding what am I doing here, and then Benny Goodman is sitting at my bar. And I went to Raymond Wellington, who was one of the original cellar rats with Kevin Zraeli down at Windows on the World. They called him the guys who worked with the famous Kevin, And I said, Ray, what the hell? Dale Chilhooly, the famous glass artist, Milton Glaser, guy, oh my God, created New York Magazine art, and Phil George, architect, and another. What's going on, man? Now I got Benny Goodman waiting for Joe. It's the Rockefeller Center thing, man. Where you been? I said, what Rockefeller Center thing? The Rainbow Room. He's been working on it for 6 months, man. This is not this real thing. I mean, the only reason we're here is because his partner, Arthur, wanted a lunch place. Joe doesn't want to be a Francophile, He wants an American restaurant, And so he said, Jesus Christ, I'm the unpaid research assistant for this new place over here. I want to have a shot at this. So I made an appointment with Joe, and I said, Joe, I think it's a great idea what you're doing. And I've been doing that research, and I'm finding some stuff. I'd like to put together an interesting menu that I think would be appropriate for this place, that would be kind of tributes to some of the great supper clubs like the Stork Club, the Colony, the Copa, that might be in the shadow of this amazing building, Okay, show me. I worked on it with his partner, Michael Whiteman. Michael had some old books he lent me. I go to Fifth Avenue, by the way, after my interview. Right away, right? As soon as I walked out the door, it's just 1 block away. It's Madison in 49. And I go into Doubleday. No such book, man. I said, well, and then I go into Barnes & Noble. I'm sorry, I don't think it exists, man. And I'm thinking, is Joe fucking with me? What's going on here? But Scribner's was still open across the street and down the block, a couple blocks. And that was the famous, Scribner's. I mean, Hemingway's agent sat in an arched window on the second floor. You could see him from the street.
Really?
Yeah. So I walk in, and I found somebody who looked like he knew what he was doing. And I said, Jerry Thomas, How to Mix Drinks? Wait a minute. And he comes back with this old catalog. And he says, yeah, they're right. You're not going to find this. It was originally published in 1862, last edition in 1887. There was a private edition in 1929. You're going to find this. I found it.
Yeah.
Found it.
Yeah.
I called the former head bartender of the 21 Club. His name was Brian Ray. Did you ever have the good fortune to meet Brian Ray? A little diminutive guy, but a firecracker.
Yeah.
And he had, at that time, the Campari collection of books, they bought it from him.
Ah. So he was collecting. So you got the Jerry
He
Thomas
sent me 2 boxes of his seconds.
Wow.
He had an idea of mine, too, because he wanted to do some work with Joe, including an 1862 Jerry Thomas. No one was collecting back then.
No, of course not.
I mean, now it's $5,000. Back then, he probably got it for $30 at a garage sale,
Yeah.
And I just lucked out. I mean, my God. I mean, I got bottoms up from Michael. a snapshot of 1951 great cocktail lounges around the world.
Yeah, yeah.
I took the version of the Between the Sheets from there because I liked that it was made in Benedictine and cognac instead of rum and cognac. I said, why two base spirits? That's stupid. They didn't bring anything to it. Let's try the Benedictine version, and we liked that much better. So that's the one we put on the menu. As Joe said, the original sometimes is not the best.
So that you basically created this menu from this box of books.
And went to him with it. I said, this is the menu. I said, I like Michael, let's taste some of these drinks. And Michael said, I've tasted them all. I worked with him on it. I said, okay. Okay, but you can't get the gig until you pass muster with a general manager. This guy named Alan Lewis. He had worked for 45 years from the very beginning. And his offices were downtown in what were the Joe Baum and Michael Whiteman offices. I go to the meeting, and Alan had run, by the way, Windows opened in when I was in LA, when I was, and well, actually just when I was going to LA, and I couldn't afford to go there, and Ron wasn't going to take me there. It was brand new, and you wait 6 months for a reservation, so he wasn't dragging any nephews and friends and whatever. But as a matter of fact, Ron wrote the most iconic ad for the Windows on the World. One of the first times he went up, there were two nuns going up to see it. Nuns in habits. And Ron looked it over at them and he said, are you going up to Windows on the World? And they said, we are. I said, well, I might be the closest to heaven some of us will ever get. Right? That became the ad. The closest to heaven that some of us will ever get. And there's the Windows on the World. Anyway, well, I get the gig because here's what happens in my interview. He asked for a figure from me when I asked at the seat. His eyes were closed. And I threw out a figure, and it was way too low. And I was in my mind. I wasn't in the meeting. I was in my head going, "You asshole." And I got outside, and I went immediately to a phone booth, and you still had them in those days. You could go inside and shut the door. And I called him right back, and I said, "Hey, could you give me Mr. Lewis? I just left the office. This is Dale DeGroff." And they said, "Okay. And what do you want?" I said, Mr. Lewis, when you throw out that figure, you asshole, you're going to make 3 times that. Click. You see, there were no HR departments. I got the job at the Hotel Bel Air because there were no HR departments. I got this job, because these managers would never have gotten through HR departments,
How were the classic cocktails, these revival cocktails, received by the clientele?
Oh my God. I had months to train, by the way, and we had months to hire, a year, the whole year before. And I did not hire talented New York bartenders, because talented New York bartenders are sons of bitches who make things their way, and that's the way. Are you going to tell me how to make drinks? I don't think so. Sure, I'll do that. And then they go right because it's the way they make their.
You need people who can.
So I got young guys who were quick studies and friendly and fun.
Yeah.
We were asking people to tell stories, tell us a joke, tell us a life story, whatever you want to do, man. That was what Bill. I was the creative head bartender. He was the business head bartender, and so after going through resumes and everything, and we would just say to these guys, "Look, it's been a long haul here. Just tell us a story or something, so we could, just talk to us, whatever you want to do, something funny or a good life story or your uncle or whatever, I don't know." And if they were nonplussed,
if
they could do something, that was the beginning of our interest in them, Then you would take it a little further, Or look at these drinks, and they're kind of weird and everything like that, and then they talk about that a little bit, and some of them would say, "Wow, yeah, I've never heard of any of these," or some of them would go, "Wow, this is really interesting. I'd love to," So you see how you.
Do you think that's still a good way of assessing the suitability of a bartender?
Well, no, yes and no, because now we don't need to do that anymore. There are so many people that know what the hell they're doing now.
But what about the stories bit? Do you think that's still a good?
And by the way, don't get me wrong. When I worked with Pat and Mike at Charlie O's, by the way, was the first real job I had. And it was a service bar, Mike here, Pat down there. Watching those two men handle these people, advertising men, gangsters, heads of corporations. This was Rockefeller Center. I mean, they're Rockefeller Club members, and just the ease with which they handled this bar. And, they make great martinis in Manhattans like that. You didn't see any Singapore Slings or any of that stuff. But I watched these guys work, and I was in awe, So I'm not dissing bartenders when I say our bartenders didn't know what they were doing. It's just that you didn't get those drinks because nobody ordered those drinks, because nobody offered those drinks. Nobody thought about Joe did this. You know, he brought this menu, this beautiful Milton Glaser graphic menu. We put it down on every bar stool, on every seat, in the dining room, everywhere. People were blown away. Not only did they were asking questions. People came up for the menu. The Associated Press guys, Pisco Sour, man. Oh my God, we had it on an earlier menu in 1989. You know, I changed the menu. We opened 87, 89, 88, 89 was a very experimental. We had to shorten the menu a little bit, and Joe was not too happy about it because those beautiful Milton Glazers, he hoped to get a year out of them. They were fucking expensive, you know, coated, stock, 4-color, or whatever. So anyway, he said, sure, do what you got to do, but, you know, pay attention. And we didn't figure out lots of stuff. You know, I learned on the job. And Joe liked me because I was friendly with customers.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted, you know. And he knew I was passionate. So he wasn't going to lose me. I didn't know that. I was scared that when I brought that menu in and said, we need to almost half this menu, that he would freak out.
Were you're obviously in the thick of it, you're working hard, you're learning on the job, you're researching these cocktails, you're implementing them, you've got your guests, you've got your bar team and everything. Were you aware of the sort of wider effect of what was going on at the Rainbow Room on cocktail culture?
Yes. Greenwich Village, for example, I'm out with my wife. There's a menu. You know, there were no menus in New York City when we opened the Rainbow Room. There were no menus. And there's this little place in Greenwich Village, between the sheets, with my recipe. Not the one with the rum in it. I'm like, I wonder where they got that, you know. That told me that there are people out there saying, wow, this is cool. And then when Keith McNally was working on Balthazar, he brought his people up. But he was having a lot of trouble with Balthazar. This is much later in the 90s. He was having a lot of trouble with Balthazar. But he wanted his people, because the neighborhood didn't want him in the building. And the neighborhood associations are strong in that area down there. And so he's got the people, these managers and everybody to watch me work. And sort of like, where's the menu? You know, and he talked to me. And then when he was getting really frustrated, it was like, okay, and his budget was thinning, you know, because they're building this while they're planning, and you know, they weren't physically tearing the building apart yet, but they were itching to. He walked over to Lafayette Street one day, and there was a little one-story building and had a for rent sign on it. There was a glass thing in the window that said antiques, and then a stairway down to what was a basement room. He went to the person and said, can I see what's for rent? They said, well, you see behind that glass window up there, that part's for rent, and there's a little stairway that goes down, and the whole bar down below is for rent. Can I see it? And they took him down there. It was filled with furniture, and it looked like it had flooded, and it stunk. And he just stopped at the door and looked at it. Can you show me how I go upstairs? And they went over there and went to this little stair that we went. I'll take it. It's for a song. He got this place. A long lease for a song. They thought they had a sucker on the hook here, baby. And he jumped into this. He was passionate like Joe. He was like Joe, a detailed guy. Same with his management teams, you know. And this is when he called me up. He said, I need you. I can't pay you. My budgets are stressed right now. I'll give you a trade out, but I want what you're doing down there at this little place that I'm going to open soon. Can you come and give me some time? I said, sure. So he sat in on my training sessions, which I started with Jerry Thomas on these guys. I started with what we trained up there, you know. And he you know, he was, you know, it was like, wow, this is cool. And the bartenders were eating this shit up, man. I mean, he brought tons of bartenders in here. You know what he settled on for Pravda? You know by the name. Moscow subway station, graphics, everything. Upstairs, a little single bar for a little group of people, you know. And he put the character up there, a big, tall black man from New Orleans who I'm teaching how to make drinks, right? You know what I'm saying? But I was, because no one knew I was doing these drinks that he wanted to do. First, I had to make him a menu. And then he had all these bottles he got a Russian guy to teach these guys how to do flavored vodkas, you know. And he was just, everything he did was so detailed, it was so interesting. So I got the trade out, and then eventually I got the gig to do the same thing at Balthazar, Pastis, Schiller's Liquor Bar. And then I trained in one of his bars that was already open, Lucky Strike. And then he called his ex-wife and said, I got this guy, if you need some training uptown at one of his first places called, I don't remember, it was up in the Upper West Side, and I trained for her. So I got a lot of work out of it. But the first job I didn't get paid for. And when I did the second job, I put my invoice in, I charged a good invoice. And I get a letter back, and it says, "Dear Mr. DeGroff, actually, see, Pravda became sexy. He gave free parties to Vanity Magazine, Vanity Fair magazine, and several really sexy magazines. Free parties at we opened around holiday time, and the place was sexy and it was packed. You couldn't get in the lines down the block. It doubled his budget build out for Balthazar. I'm not kidding you. And when he finally got to it, the floor in Balthazar, what you see over there was Pravda, because that was not going to be the floor, that beautiful tile work that they did. And so I could have a reservation anytime I want it. So I'm being Mr. Big Guy, man. And I'm it's caviar, lamb lollipops, and it was real caviar. It wasn't bullshit caviar.
Yeah.
Champagne. So this note says to me, actually, Mr. DeGroff, we don't owe you this amount on the invoice. You actually owe us for...
You've been wrapped up.
I thought they'd tell me. Last time I ever worked on Trade Out.
Right, well, look, we've run out of time. I totally underestimated this is not just a conversation about your history and your cocktail experience.
It's about a change in the way we eat and drink in America.
Yeah, it is. This is really, I think, a kind of memoir of New York and the American restaurant and bar scene. We're going to have to do a part 2 at some point. Because there's so much stuff that I want to cover.
Talking about Joe is my favorite thing. I want young people to hear about him and what they do. There are very few Joe Baums. There's Danny Meyer, there's Keith, there's Joe, there's another Irish guy on Irish Empire who was partner in Dead Rabbit and Puck Fair and all the good Irish places, and the one I'm sure you like, named after the Swift.
Oh, yeah.
This is him, Danny McDonald. Danny McDonald's another one of these guys who gets it right because he's a detailed guy. He has 2 refrigerators for the beer kegs, one for the Guinness and one for the rest. He does it all right, and those guys are few and far between. So I want to talk about that.
Yeah, no, well, I'm so happy that you shared it, and it's just amazing to hear it from you. Let's reconvene another time. There's always more time, and let's do, because we've got up to sort of the 80s and 90s, and there's so much more to talk about. We need to talk about your books. We need to talk about your products. You've got it at Amaro now. But we're just going to have to...
We'll get there.
We'll get there at some point. But look...
Listen to me, what a promoter I am, huh?
Yeah, you didn't get around to talking about your books or your brand. Brilliant. But look, what a pleasure. I've got to get to the airport and fly back to the UK. This is why. You've just got off the airport from New Orleans. But DeGroff, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, brother.
Thank you.
Are you kidding me?
Thanks so much.
I'm happy to do it, man.
All right. Cool.
It was a pleasure.